I woke up that January morning in 2025 to find a bright orange envelope tucked under my windshield wiper, frozen solid against the glass of my truck. The moment I saw that envelope, I knew my day was about to get significantly worse. I had been living in the Riverside Meadows community in Spokane, Washington for 3 years now, and in that time, I had learned that nothing good ever came in those orange envelopes from the Homeowners Association. My name is Ethan Lawson, and I am a 42-year-old civil engineer who works from home most days. I bought my property here specifically because it sat at the edge of the development, bordering a small creek that fed into the Spokane River. The property came with an old stone bridge that crossed the creek, a relic from when this land was a farm back in the 1940s. That bridge was technically on my property, but it had been used as a cut-through by the neighborhood for decades. When I bought the place, the realtor mentioned it in passing, saying how nice it was that I would be maintaining such a community asset. At the time, I thought nothing of it. I peeled the envelope off my windshield and trudged back inside, my boots crunching on the 2 inches of snow that had fallen during the night. It was nothing major, just a light dusting that would probably melt by afternoon given the forecast. I made myself a coffee and sat down at my kitchen table, looking out at the bridge. 3 of my neighbors were already using it, cutting through my property to reach the main road instead of taking the long way around through the subdivision. The letter inside the orange envelope was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with the ridiculous logo they had commissioned last year that looked like a cross between a sunburst and a gear. The message was clear and infuriating. Dear Mr. Lawson, it has come to the attention of the Riverside Meadows HOA board that you failed to remove snow from your driveway and walkways within the required 24-hour period as outlined in Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Community Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. The snowfall began at approximately 11 p.m. on January 14th, and as of 11 a.m. on January 15th, snow remains visible on your property. You are hereby fined $250. This fine must be paid within 15 days to avoid additional penalties. Failure to comply with CC and Articus in the future may result in increased fines and potential legal action. Sincerely, Patricia Hendricks, HOA President. I read the letter 3 times, feeling my blood pressure rise with each reading. The snow had fallen during the night while I was sleeping. It was barely 2 inches. I had been planning to clear it after my morning coffee, which was exactly what any reasonable person would do. But apparently, Patricia Hendricks had been out with her measuring tape and stopwatch, documenting violations at 11 in the morning. Patricia was exactly what you would picture when someone said the words, HOA President. She was a 53-year-old woman with short blonde hair that she kept in that helmet-like style that required weekly salon visits. She wore pastel cardigans and drove a white Lexus SUV that was always spotless, even in winter. She had moved into Riverside Meadows 4 years ago and had immediately run for the HOA board, winning easily because nobody else wanted the job. Within 6 months, she had installed herself as president and had been making everyone's life miserable ever since. I called my neighbor, Frank Morris, who lived 2 houses down. Frank was a retired firefighter, and he had been in the neighborhood since it was built 12 years ago. Did you get one of those orange envelopes? I asked. Sure did, Frank said. Fine me for having my garbage cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours. I put them out Tuesday night for Wednesday morning pickup, and apparently that was 8 p.m., and Patricia drove by at 9 a.m. on Wednesday and they were still out. Never mind that the garbage truck does not come until 10 a.m. She wants $150. This is insane, I said. She fined me $250 for not clearing 2 inches of snow within 24 hours. It had not even been 12 hours since the snow stopped falling. Frank sighed. She is on a rampage this month. I think she is trying to build up the HOA fund for some project she wants to do. Have you been to any of the meetings? No, I admitted. I work late most nights and I have honestly been avoiding them. Well, you might want to start going. She has been proposing all kinds of new rules. Last meeting, she tried to pass a regulation that would require everyone to repaint their houses every 5 years in approved colors only. It barely failed to pass. After I hung up with Frank, I sat at my kitchen table and fumed. $250 for not shoveling snow fast enough. It was theft, plain and simple. The HOA had become a racket and Patricia was running it like her personal fiefdom. I went outside and cleared my driveway and walkway, taking my time and doing a thorough job. As I worked, I watched neighbors continue to use the bridge on my property. The bridge was about 30 feet long, constructed of old stone and timber, and it was sturdy as hell. I had reinforced it myself when I first moved in, replacing rotted boards and adding new support beams. I did this not because I had to, but because I did not want anyone getting hurt. The bridge saved the residents on the north end of the subdivision about 10 minutes of driving time, because otherwise they had to loop all the way around to the main entrance. As I cleared the last of the snow, Patricia herself drove by in her Lexus. She slowed down, rolled down her window, and called out to me. "Good afternoon, Ethan. I see you received my letter." I leaned on my shovel and looked at her. "I did. I think a $250 fine for 2 inches of snow is excessive, Patricia." "The rules are very clear," she said, her voice dripping with that condescending sweetness that made me want to punch a wall. 24 hours from the beginning of snowfall. We all agreed to these rules when we purchased our properties. "I was asleep when the snow started falling," I said. "And it is January in Spokane. We are going to get snow." "Then perhaps you should be more vigilant," Patricia said. "We all must do our part to maintain property values. Unshoveled snow makes the neighborhood look unkempt." She drove off before I could respond, her Lexus gliding silently down the road. I stood there, gripping my shovel, and something inside me snapped, not in an angry, violent way, but in a cold, calculated way. Patricia wanted to play games with rules and regulations. Fine, I could play that game too. I went back inside and pulled up the property deed and survey for my house. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing every document related to my property, including the original plat map from when the subdivision was created. What I found was interesting, very interesting indeed. The bridge was entirely on my property. There was no easement. There was no public right-of-way. When the neighborhood was developed, the builder had simply left the old bridge in place, and people had started using it. Over time, it became an assumed path, but there was nothing legally requiring me to maintain it or allow access to it. It was my bridge on my land, and I could do with it as I pleased. I made myself dinner that night with a plan forming in my mind. I was not going to do anything rash. I was going to be smart about this. I would pay the ridiculous fine because fighting it would probably cost more in time and stress than it was worth. But I was also going to stop maintaining the bridge. If Patricia wanted to fine me for not shoveling my driveway fast enough, then she could deal with the consequences of me following the absolute letter of the law regarding my property. The next morning, I woke up early and went outside to look at the bridge. It was a beautiful piece of old craftsmanship, and I felt a little guilty about what I was planning. But then, I remembered that orange envelope, and my resolve hardened. I spent that day drafting a letter of my own. I addressed it to the HOA board and sent copies to every house that regularly used the bridge. The letter was polite and professional. Dear neighbors, after careful review of my property documents and consideration of recent HOA enforcement actions, I am writing to inform you that effective February 1st, 2025, I will no longer be maintaining the stone bridge that crosses the creek on my property. This includes snow removal, structural repairs, and general upkeep. The bridge will remain accessible for the time being, but please use it at your own risk. I will be posting appropriate signage to reflect this change. This decision comes after reviewing my property rights and obligations and determining that I have no legal requirement to maintain this structure for public use. For those who have been using the bridge as a shortcut, please be aware that you may need to use the main subdivision entrance going forward. Sincerely, Ethan Lawson. I printed out 30 copies and hand-delivered them over the course of 2 days. The reactions were immediate and varied. Some neighbors, like Frank, completely understood and even supported me. Others looked at me like I had just kicked a puppy. A few tried to reason with me, explaining how much time the bridge saved them. I was polite but firm with everyone. The reaction I was most interested in came on the 3rd day after I distributed my letter. Patricia showed up at my door at 8 in the morning. I was already awake and had been half expecting her. "Ethan, we need to talk about this ridiculous letter," she said as soon as I opened the door. She did not wait for an invitation, just pushed past me into my house. I bit back my irritation and closed the door. "What about it?" I asked calmly. "You cannot just close off the bridge," she said. "That is a community resource. People have been using it for years." "It is on my property," I said. "I have no legal obligation to maintain it or allow access to it. I have been doing so out of goodwill, but given the recent increase in HOA enforcement actions, I have decided to focus my time and resources on maintaining only what is strictly required of me." Patricia's face flushed red. "This is about the fine, is not it? You are throwing a tantrum because you got fined for breaking the rules." "I am not throwing a tantrum," I said, keeping my voice level. "I am making a rational decision about my property. You have made it very clear that rules must be followed to the letter. So I am following the rules. The rules say I must maintain my driveway and walkways. They say nothing about maintaining a bridge for the convenience of my neighbors." "This is petty," Patricia said. "Is it?" I asked. "You fined me $250 for not shoveling 2 inches of snow within your arbitrary time frame. That seems pretty petty to me. But you are right about one thing. We do need to follow the rules. So that is exactly what I am going to do." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "The HOA board will be discussing this at our next meeting. This is not over." "I look forward to hearing from you," I said. Opening the door for her to leave, she stormed out, and I watched her get into her Lexus and peel out of my driveway, spraying gravel. I felt a grim satisfaction. The game was on. February 1st arrived, and I made good on my promise. I stopped clearing snow from the bridge. We got another 4 inches of snow that week, and I meticulously cleared my driveway, my walkways, and even the path to my mailbox. But the bridge remained untouched. The snow piled up on the old wooden planks, pristine and white. I put up signs at both ends of the bridge. "Private property. Cross at your own risk. Owner assumes no liability for injuries or damages." I had checked with my insurance company, and as long as I posted warnings and did not actively maintain the bridge, I was covered. The first morning after the snow, I watched from my kitchen window as several neighbors approached the bridge, saw the snow, and hesitated. A few tried to cross anyway, slipping and sliding on the snow-covered planks. One woman nearly fell through a gap where the snow had hidden a weak board. She made it across but looked terrified. After that, most people turned around and took the long way. The impact on the north end of the subdivision was immediate and significant. What had been a 5-minute drive to the main road became a 15-minute drive. In the mornings, when everyone was trying to get to work, the main subdivision entrance became congested. People were late to work. Kids were late to school, and everyone knew exactly why. My phone started ringing. Neighbors called to plead with me to reconsider. Some offered to help maintain the bridge. Others tried to guilt me, talking about the inconvenience and how we were supposed to be a community. I listened politely to everyone and gave them all the same answer. I had no legal obligation to maintain the bridge, and given the HOA's recent enforcement priorities, I was focusing my efforts elsewhere. The HOA board meeting that month was held on February 15th in the subdivision clubhouse. I decided to attend. It was a cold Thursday evening and the parking lot was packed. The meeting room was standing room only, which was unprecedented. Usually, these meetings drew maybe a dozen people. Tonight, there had to be 75 residents crammed into a space designed for 40. Patricia called the meeting to order, and the first item on the agenda was, unsurprisingly, my bridge. She did not waste any time. As most of you are aware, we have a situation with the bridge on Mr. Lawson's property. He has decided to stop maintaining it, which is causing significant inconvenience for many residents. We are here tonight to discuss potential solutions. A woman named Denise Chen, who lived on the north end, stood up immediately. This is ridiculous. My commute has doubled. My kids are late to school every day. Ethan needs to maintain that bridge. It is his property, Frank said from the back of the room. He can do what he wants with it. But we have been using it for years, another man said. It is basically a public right-of-way at this point. I stood up. If I may address the board, I said. Patricia looked like she wanted to refuse, but too many people were watching. She nodded curtly. I understand the inconvenience this is causing, I said, but the bridge is entirely on my private property. I have reviewed all the property documents, and there is no easement, no public right-of-way, and no legal requirement for me to maintain it. For years, I have been doing so voluntarily, spending my own time and money to keep it safe for everyone to use. However, given the recent increase in HOA enforcement and fines, I have decided that I need to prioritize my resources. I simply cannot afford to maintain a structure that I am not legally required to maintain while also facing potential fines for minor violations of HOA rules. The room erupted in arguments. Some people agreed with me. Others thought I was being petty. Patricia banged her gavel, trying to restore order. The HOA could take over maintenance of the bridge, someone suggested. We would need an easement from Mr. Lawson, said Richard Torres, the HOA treasurer, and that would require his agreement. All eyes turned to me. I would be willing to discuss an easement, I said, but it would need to be a formal legal arrangement, properly documented and recorded. And I would expect the HOA to assume all liability and maintenance costs. Patricia's face was red. This is blackmail. No, I said calmly. This is property law. You wanted to enforce rules strictly. I am doing the same. The meeting devolved into chaos after that. Patricia tried to regain control, but people were angry and frustrated. Some were angry at me. Others were angry at Patricia. The meeting finally adjourned with no resolution, just a promise to revisit the issue at the next meeting. As I was leaving, a man I did not know well approached me. His name was Gary, and he lived on the north end. You know, my wife and I talked about this, he said. We think you are doing the right thing. Patricia has been out of control for years, Maybe this will finally make people pay attention to what she is doing." "Thanks," I said. "I appreciate that." Over the next few weeks, the situation escalated. The snow kept falling. The bridge became increasingly impassable. The traffic jams at the main entrance got worse, and the complaints to the HOA became a torrent. But something else started happening too. People began paying attention to the HOA board in a way they never had before. They started showing up to meetings. They started asking questions about the budget, about enforcement priorities, about why some rules were enforced aggressively while others were ignored. It turned out that Patricia had been very selective in her enforcement. Homes that were owned by her friends rarely got fined, even when they had violations. But homes owned by people she did not like, or people who had disagreed with her in the past, got fined for everything. Someone dug up the records and found that in the past year, the HOA had collected over $40,000 in fines. But most of that money had come from just 15 households. Meanwhile, the HOA had spent $20,000 on landscaping for the entrance, using a company owned by Patricia's brother-in-law. The March HOA meeting was even more packed than the February meeting. People were demanding answers. Patricia tried to deflect and control the narrative, but she was losing control. A motion was made to recall the entire board and hold new elections. It passed by a significant margin. During all of this, my bridge sat there, unused and covered in snow. I kept my driveway immaculate. I followed every HOA rule to the letter. I was determined that Patricia would not be able to fine me for anything. In mid-March, Patricia made a mistake. She was so focused on trying to force me to open the bridge that she overstepped her authority. She sent me a letter demanding that I either reopen and maintain the bridge or face a fine of $500 per day for creating a public nuisance. I took that letter straight to an attorney. His name was Michael Brennan, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. He read the letter, then read my property documents, and then he smiled. "She has no legal basis for this," he said. "None whatsoever. The bridge is your private property. You are not creating a nuisance by declining to maintain your own property. If anything, the HOA is harassing you." "What should I do?" I asked. "Let me handle it," Michael said. Michael sent Patricia and the HOA board a letter that was a masterpiece of legal precision. It explained in detail why the HOA had no authority to demand that I maintain the bridge. It cited case law and property statutes. It pointed out that if the HOA continued its harassment, I would have grounds for a lawsuit. And it demanded that the HOA cease all enforcement actions against me and rescind the previous fine. The letter had the desired effect. Patricia backed off. She stopped sending me threatening letters. But she also did not rescind the original $250 fine. I had paid it under protest, and Michael advised me that fighting it would cost more than it was worth at this point. But the important thing was that Patricia could not touch me anymore. The new HOA elections were held in April. Patricia tried to run for president again, but she lost badly. A man named David Park, who was a retired accountant and had been vocal about the need for transparency and fair enforcement, won the presidency. 3 new board members were elected as well, all people who had been critical of Patricia's leadership. The first thing the new board did was conduct an audit of the HOA finances. What they found was disturbing. Patricia had not been embezzling money outright, but she had been awarding contracts to friends and family members without competitive bidding. She had been using HOA funds for personal expenses that she claimed were HOA-related, like expensive dinners and spa days that she said were board planning sessions. and she had been selectively enforcing rules to punish people she did not like while letting her friends slide. The board confronted Patricia with their findings at a special meeting in May. I attended, along with what seemed like half the neighborhood. Patricia denied everything at first, but when faced with receipts and documentation, she crumbled. She resigned from the board on the spot and left the meeting in tears. But that was not the end of it. David and the new board decided to refer the matter to the HOA's attorney to determine if any laws had been broken. The attorney reviewed the evidence and concluded that, while Patricia's conduct was unethical and violated the HOA's bylaws, it did not rise to the level of criminal fraud. However, the board decided to pursue civil action to recover the misappropriated funds. Patricia hired her own attorney, and the case dragged on through the summer. Eventually, in August, they reached a settlement. Patricia agreed to repay $12,000 to the HOA and to resign permanently from any leadership position. She also agreed to drop any and all claims against homeowners, including me, for alleged violations. Through all of this, the bridge remained closed. Snow had melted, spring had come, and now summer was in full swing. The bridge was still there, still structurally sound but overgrown with weeds and clearly unused. In June, David Park came to visit me. We sat on my back porch, looking out at the bridge and the creek. "I want to apologize for everything that happened with Patricia," he said. "The board should have reined her in years ago, but we were all too complacent." "I appreciate that," I said. "I also want to ask if you would be willing to discuss an easement for the bridge," David said. "We have talked about it as a board and we think it would be beneficial for the community. But we want to do it right, with a proper legal agreement that protects you and compensates you fairly." I had been thinking about this for months. The truth was, I had never wanted to close the bridge. I liked being a good neighbor. I liked helping people. What I did not like was being taken advantage of and being treated unfairly. "I am willing to discuss it," I said, "but I have conditions." "Name them," David said. "First, the HOA needs to establish clear, fair enforcement policies that apply equally to everyone. No more selective enforcement. No more targeting people Patricia did not like. Second, the HOA assumes all liability for the bridge. Third, the HOA pays for all maintenance and upkeep. Fourth, the easement agreement includes a clause that if the HOA ever tries to fine me for a minor violation like the snow incident again, the easement is void and I can close the bridge permanently. And fifth, the HOA refunds the $250 I paid for that ridiculous fine." David listened carefully and nodded. "Those all seem reasonable to me. Let me take it to the board." The board met the following week and agreed to all my conditions. Michael Brennan drew up the easement agreement and both sides reviewed it carefully. It was signed in July, with the HOA agreeing to pay me a token amount of $1 per year for the easement, which Michael said was important to make it a valid contract. The HOA also passed new enforcement guidelines that required warnings before fines for first-time minor violations, established a clear appeals process, and mandated that all fines be reviewed and approved by the full board rather than just the president. They also instituted a policy requiring competitive bidding for any contract over $5,000. In August, the HOA hired a contractor to refurbish the bridge. They replaced all the old wooden planks with new treated lumber, reinforced the stone supports, and added railings for safety. They also agreed to plow and maintain the bridge in winter. The bridge reopened in September, and the neighborhood returned to normal, but things were not really normal. They were better. People were paying attention to the HOA now. Board meetings remained well attended. The budget was transparent and published quarterly. Enforcement was fair and consistent, and people were generally happier. As for Patricia, she stayed in her house for a few more months, but the social isolation was too much. She had burned too many bridges, metaphorically speaking. In November, I saw a for sale sign go up in her yard. By December, she was gone. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to Arizona to be closer to her daughter. Frank came over for a beer one evening in December, almost a year after this whole mess started. We sat on my porch, watching the snow fall gently on the bridge. The HOA plow truck had already been by twice to clear it. "You know, you could have just paid the fine and let it go," Frank said. "I could have," I agreed. "But then Patricia would still be running the HOA like her personal kingdom. And we would all still be dealing with her arbitrary enforcement and her shady contracts. Sometimes you have to stand up for principle, even when it is inconvenient." "Well, you definitely stood up," Frank said. "And I am glad you did. This neighborhood is a better place now." I watched my neighbors using the bridge, heading home from work or going out for the evening. Kids were sledding on the hill near the creek. Someone had put up Christmas lights on the bridge railings and they twinkled in the twilight. "Yeah," I said. "I am glad too." The experience taught me a lot about community, about standing up for yourself, and about the importance of fair and transparent governance. HOAs can be wonderful things when they are run properly, by people who genuinely care about the community, rather than people who just want power and control. But they can also become nightmares when they are run by petty tyrants who abuse their authority. I never regretted my decision to close the bridge, even though it caused significant inconvenience for a lot of people, including some who had nothing to do with the conflict. Sometimes you have to create a crisis to force change. If I had just quietly paid the fine and grumbled to my friends, nothing would have changed. Patricia would have continued her reign of terror, and the HOA would have continued to be a source of frustration and anger. By taking a stand, by forcing the issue, I made people pay attention. I made them see what was really going on, and ultimately, that led to real, positive change for the entire community. The legal settlement with Patricia was finalized in January, exactly 1 year after that first orange envelope appeared on my windshield. She paid back the $12,000 over 6 months, and the HOA used that money to fund several community improvement projects, including new playground equipment and repairs to the clubhouse. The new board also revisited many of Patricia's old fines and discovered that dozens of them had been unjustified or excessive. They established a process for homeowners to appeal old fines, and many people got refunds. The HOA also eliminated several of the more ridiculous rules that Patricia had pushed through, including the one about garbage cans and the proposed mandatory house repainting schedule. In February, I got a call from a reporter at the Spokesman Review, Spokane's major newspaper. Someone had tipped them off about the HOA drama in Riverside Meadows, and they wanted to do a story about it. I agreed to an interview, as did several other residents and David Park. The story ran in March, under the headline "Spokane HOA Dispute Leads to Reform." It detailed Patricia's abuses, my decision to close the bridge, and the subsequent changes in the HOA's governance. The reporter framed it as a cautionary tale about what can happen when HOAs are not properly overseen by their members. The story got picked up by several national news outlets and went viral on social media. For a few weeks, I was getting calls from people all over the country who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares and wanted advice. I told them all the same thing. Document everything, know your rights, get a good attorney if needed, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. The attention was uncomfortable, but it also felt good to know that our experience might help others. HOA abuse is a real problem in America, and too many people just accept it because they do not know they have options. Spring came to Spokane, and the snow melted. The creek swelled with runoff, rushing under the bridge. I spent a lot of time that spring working in my yard, planting a garden and enjoying the peace and quiet. The HOA left me alone and I left them alone. It was a good arrangement. In April, David Park stopped by again. He had a proposition. "The board has been talking, and we would like to know if you would be interested in joining," he said. "We have an open seat, and we think you would bring a valuable perspective." I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no. I had never wanted to be involved in HOA politics. But another part of me recognized that if good people refused to get involved, then people like Patricia would always end up in charge. "Can I think about it?" I asked. "Of course," David said. "No pressure." I talked to Frank about it. I talked to some other neighbors. I talked to my girlfriend, Hannah, whom I had started dating in March. Hannah was a teacher at one of the local elementary schools, and she had a good perspective on community involvement. "I think you should do it," she said. "You have already shown that you are willing to stand up for what is right, and you understand better than most people how important it is to have fair rules that are enforced consistently. The HOA needs people like you." So I said yes. I joined the HOA board in May, taking over the position that had been vacated when one of the board members moved out of state. It was a 2-year term, and I committed to seeing it through. Being on the board was educational. I learned a lot about what goes into running a community association. There were legitimate issues that needed to be addressed: aging infrastructure, budget constraints, disputes between neighbors. But I also saw how easy it would be for someone to abuse their position if they were not being watched carefully. We worked hard to maintain the transparency and fairness that had been established after Patricia's ouster. We published detailed financial reports. We held regular town halls where residents could ask questions and voice concerns. We established committees for major decisions, ensuring that no single person had too much power. The bridge became a symbol of what we had accomplished. It was well maintained, heavily used, and appreciated by everyone. People thanked me regularly for allowing the easement, and I always reminded them that it was a community asset now, not just my property. In June, we got a letter from Patricia's attorney. She was suing the HOA for defamation, claiming that the newspaper article and our public statements about her conduct had damaged her reputation and caused her emotional distress. She was seeking $50,000 in damages. The board consulted with our attorney, who reviewed the case and determined that we had a strong defense. Everything we had said about Patricia was true and well documented. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation. Still, it meant more legal fees and more stress. The case went through discovery over the summer. Patricia's attorney demanded all kinds of documents, which we provided. Our attorney took Patricia's deposition, which by all accounts did not go well for her. When confronted with the evidence of her misconduct, she became defensive and evasive. In September, Patricia's attorney approached ours about settling. They wanted to drop the case in exchange for the HOA agreeing not to pursue any further action against Patricia. Our attorney brought the offer to the board. "I recommend we take it," he said. "We are almost certainly going to win if this goes to trial, but trials are expensive and time-consuming. This way, we can put the whole thing behind us once and for all." The board voted unanimously to accept the settlement. Patricia withdrew her lawsuit, and both sides signed a mutual release agreeing not to sue each other in the future. It was finally, truly over. That fall was beautiful in Spokane. The leaves turned gold and red, and the weather was crisp and clear. I spent a lot of time on the bridge, just standing there and watching the creek flow by. It was peaceful in a way that felt earned. Hannah and I got engaged in October. We were planning a small wedding for the following summer, right there in Riverside Meadows, with the reception at the clubhouse. It felt right to celebrate there, in the community that had become so important to me. The November HOA meeting was notable for being completely routine and boring. We discussed the budget for the next year, approved some minor landscaping work, and reviewed a request from a homeowner to add a deck. Everything was cordial and professional. No drama, no fighting, no crisis. It was wonderful. In December, the neighborhood held its annual holiday party at the clubhouse. The turnout was the best it had been in years. People were genuinely happy to be part of the community. Children played while adults talked and laughed. Someone had set up a photo booth, and families took pictures in front of a backdrop decorated with lights and garland. I stood in the corner with a cup of punch, watching it all, and Frank came up beside me. "You did good, Ethan," he said. "You really did." "We all did," I said. "It took a lot of people standing up and demanding better." "Yeah, but you started it," Frank said. "If you had just paid that fine and kept your head down, we would still be living under Patricia's thumb. You took a risk and it paid off." He was right, though I had not thought of it that way at the time. When I closed the bridge, I was just angry and frustrated and determined not to be pushed around. I had not been thinking about community reform or setting an example. I had just been thinking about fairness and principle. But that is often how change happens, is it not? One person decides they have had enough and takes a stand. Sometimes that person fails and nothing changes. But sometimes, if they are lucky and persistent, and if the cause is just that stand inspires others, it creates momentum. It forces people to pay attention and to act. The holidays came and went. The year 2025 turned into 2026, and life in Riverside Meadows continued peacefully. The HOA functioned well under David's leadership. The bridge remained open and well maintained. Property values were rising, not because of strict enforcement of petty rules, but because it was genuinely a good place to live. I continued to serve on the HOA board, and I found that I actually enjoyed it. There was satisfaction in solving problems, in making the community better, in helping neighbors work through disputes. It was not glamorous work, but it was important. Hannah and I got married in June of 2026, as planned. The ceremony was held at a small church in downtown Spokane, and the reception was at the Riverside Meadows clubhouse. Nearly the entire neighborhood attended. Even the bridge played a role. Hannah and I had our first dance as a married couple to a song while, through the clubhouse windows, we could see the bridge lit up with fairy lights that some of the neighbors had hung as a surprise. Standing there, dancing with my wife, surrounded by friends and neighbors in a community that had come together and rebuilt itself into something better, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Not just for the happy ending, but for the journey that got us there. The whole experience had taught me something fundamental about community and about democracy, even democracy on the small scale of an HOA. Systems of governance only work when people participate and hold their leaders accountable. When people become apathetic or assume that someone else will handle things, that is when petty tyrants like Patricia can take over. But when people engage, when they pay attention, when they demand transparency and fairness, those systems can work beautifully. They can create real community and real quality of life. It just takes effort and vigilance. A few weeks after the wedding, I was working in my garden on a Saturday morning when a car pulled into my driveway. I did not recognize it at first, but when the driver got out, I realized it was Patricia. I had not seen her since she left Riverside Meadows more than a year ago. She looked different, older somehow, more tired. She walked up to where I was working, and I stood up, wiping dirt from my hands. "Ethan," she said, "I hope I am not intruding. What can I do for you, Patricia?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "I came to apologize," she said. "I should have done this a long time ago, but I was too proud and too angry. I was wrong about the fine. I was wrong about a lot of things. I let power go to my head and I hurt a lot of people. I am sorry." I studied her face. She seemed sincere. "I appreciate you saying that," I said. "I have been in therapy," she continued, "trying to understand why I acted the way I did. My therapist says I have control issues, that I was using the HOA to fill some void in my life. I do not know if that is true, but I do know that I made a lot of people miserable, and I am sorry for that." "Thank you for the apology," I said. "I accept it, and for what it is worth, I hope you are doing better." "I am trying," she said. "Arizona is good. I am closer to my daughter and grandkids. I joined a book club. I am learning to just be a regular person instead of always needing to be in charge of something." She left after a few more minutes of small talk. I watched her drive away, feeling a strange mix of emotions. I was glad she had apologized. I was glad she was working on herself. But I also knew that her apology did not undo the damage she had caused or the stress she had put people through. Still, it was a form of closure. And closure is valuable. Life moved on. The seasons changed. The bridge stood strong, a testament to community cooperation and the importance of standing up for what is right. Every time I crossed it, every time I saw neighbors using it, I thought about that orange envelope and the chain of events it had set in motion. Looking back, I would not change anything. The whole experience was stressful and frustrating and sometimes felt overwhelming, but it was also empowering. It reminded me that ordinary people have power when they choose to use it. That communities can change and improve when members are willing to get involved and demand better. The bridge had been the catalyst, but what really changed was not the bridge itself. It was the community. It was the people. We learned to hold our leaders accountable. We learned that rules should serve the community, not the other way around. We learned that fairness and transparency matter. And we learned that sometimes, when you are pushed too far, the best response is not to fight fire with fire, but to carefully, deliberately remove something that others take for granted. To show them what they stand to lose if they continue down a destructive path. The bridge was my leverage, but it was never about the bridge. It was about respect, fairness, and the principle that people should not be punished arbitrarily by those in power. On a cold January morning in 2027, exactly 2 years after that first orange envelope appeared on my windshield, I woke up to fresh snow. About 3 inches had fallen overnight. I made my coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and looked out at the bridge. The HOA plow truck was already there, clearing the snow from the planks, making sure it was safe for everyone to use. I sipped my coffee and smiled. Then I got dressed, went outside, and cleared my own driveway. Not because I was afraid of a fine, but because it was the right thing to do. Because I took pride in my property. Because I was part of a community that worked together and treated each other with respect. And that, in the end, was what mattered most. Not winning some petty dispute, but creating a place where people could live together peacefully and fairly. A place where rules existed to help, not to hurt. A place where no one person could abuse their power because the community was watching and engaged. The bridge stood as a reminder of all of that. Every day, dozens of people crossed it, most of them probably never thinking about the conflict that had once threatened to close it forever. They took it for granted, which was exactly as it should be. Infrastructure, like good governance, works best when you do not have to think about it. But I would never take it for granted. Every time I crossed that bridge, I remembered. I remembered the frustration and the anger. I remembered the decision to take a stand. I remembered the moment when everything could have gone wrong but instead went right. And I remembered the lesson that got me through it all. Sometimes the best way to fight back is not to fight at all, but simply to stop doing something you were never required to do in the first place. To enforce your own boundaries as firmly as others try to enforce their rules on you. That lesson served me well in all aspects of my life. In my work, in my marriage, in my continued service on the HOA board. Know your rights, understand your obligations, be willing to stand up for principle, even when it is difficult. And never let anyone bully you into surrendering what is rightfully yours. The sun rose higher, glinting off the snow. The bridge gleamed in the morning light, solid and permanent. Hannah came downstairs and we had breakfast together, watching our neighbors head off to work, crossing the bridge, going about their lives in peace. It was a good life, a life worth fighting for. And I had fought for it in my own way, with patience and principle, and a willingness to let others feel the consequences of their unfair actions. The story of the bridge became local legend in Riverside Meadows. New residents heard about it when they moved in, usually from multiple sources, each with their own version of events. Some versions made me out to be a hero. Others made me out to be petty and vindictive. The truth, as always, was somewhere in between. I was just a man who got tired of being pushed around and decided to push back in the only way he could. I used the leverage I had, not to destroy, but to force change. And in the end, everyone benefited. The orange envelopes still appeared occasionally in Riverside Meadows. But now they were rare, reserved for actual violations that affected safety or property values. They came with warnings first, and opportunities to correct the issue. They were tools of last resort, not weapons of intimidation. And every time I saw one appear on someone's door, I remembered where we had been and how far we had come. I remembered that change is possible, but it requires courage and sacrifice. I remembered that communities are built by people who care enough to get involved, even when it is inconvenient or uncomfortable. The bridge still stands today, strong and well maintained. I cross it nearly every day. Sometimes I pause in the middle, looking down at the creek, thinking about everything that structure represents. It is more than wood and stone. It is a symbol of community cooperation, of the importance of fair governance, of the power of individual action to create collective change. And every time I cross it, I am grateful. Grateful for the lesson learned, grateful for the community we built, and grateful that I had the courage to take a stand when it mattered most. The bridge connects more than two pieces of land. It connects us to each other and to the principles that make community life possible. Respect, fairness, accountability, and the understanding that we all do better when we work together. That is the real story of the bridge. Not a tale of petty revenge, but a story of transformation. Of a community that lost its way and found it again. Of people who learned to value each other and hold their leaders to account. Of one man who said enough and meant it, and of the good that came from that simple act of defiance. The snow continued to fall that morning, soft and steady. But I was not worried. The bridge would be cleared. My driveway would be cleared. Everything would be taken care of, not because of fear or coercion, but because we all understood our responsibilities and took care of them willingly. That is what community is supposed to be. And that is what we had finally, truly become.